Some people collect stamps, others collect coins. Me? I collected something far more valuable, and apparently far more irritating to my 32-year-old son who thought he knew better than a woman who'd spent 4 decades carefully curating what he dismissed as mom's weird obsession. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Margaret Chen Williams, and at 65, I've learned that the most expensive lessons in life aren't the ones you pay for. They're the ones your own children refuse to learn until it's almost too late. It started on a gray Tuesday morning in November when my son David showed up at my townhouse in Portland, Oregon, unannounced. I was in my art room, carefully cataloging a recent acquisition, a small but exquisite piece by a local artist named Rebecca Torres, whose work I'd been following for 15 years. The morning light streaming through my north-facing windows illuminated the carefully arranged walls of my collection, each piece positioned with the precision of a museum curator. "Mom, we need to talk," David announced, barging into my sanctuary without so much as a knock. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and he carried that particular brand of exhaustion that comes from working too many late nights at his tech startup. I set down my magnifying glass and turned to face him. "Good morning to you, too, sweetheart. Coffee?" "This is serious." He gestured broadly at my walls, his expression somewhere between exasperation and disgust. "What is all this stuff?" I followed his gaze across my collection. 43 years of careful selection stared back at us, paintings, sketches, small sculptures, and mixed media pieces from artists spanning 3 decades. Some were from galleries, others discovered at art fairs, estate sales, and studio visits. Each one chosen not just for its beauty, but for its story, its technique, its place in the broader narrative of contemporary American art. "This is my art collection, David. You've seen it hundreds of times." "I've ignored it hundreds of times," he corrected, pulling out his phone and starting to pace. "Mom, I'm trying to help you downsize. Sarah and I have been talking, and we think it's time you moved into something smaller. Maybe one of those nice senior communities with activities, and I'm 65, not 95. And all this clutter has got to go." He waved dismissively at a stunning piece by Marcus Johnson, a Black artist from Chicago whose work had been featured in the Whitney Biennial just 2 years prior. "I mean, seriously, Mom. Look at this place. It's like a garage sale exploded." The insult hit harder than I expected. 43 years of passion, knowledge, and careful curation reduced to a garage sale. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice level. "David, these aren't random purchases. This is a serious collection." "A collection of what? Nobody's ever heard of any of these people." He squinted at the signature on a delicate watercolor by Elena Rodriguez, whose work had been climbing in value for the past decade. "Who's Elena Rodriguez? Did you meet her at one of those craft fairs?" "She's been exhibited in galleries from New York to Los Angeles. Her work is held in private collections across—" "Mom." David's voice took on that patronizing tone I'd grown to despise, the same one he used when explaining why I should switch to a smartphone or use contactless payments. "I know you think these have value, but let's be realistic. You probably paid, what, a few $100s for each of these? Maybe $1,000 for the bigger ones? And now they're just taking up space." I watched him dismiss pieces that represented not just financial investment, but decades of relationships with artists, gallery owners, and fellow collectors. He had no idea that the craft fair artist he'd just mocked had a piece selling for $12,000 at a gallery in Soho last month. "Have you ever had any of these appraised?" he continued, already knowing the answer he expected. "Some of them, yes." "Recently?" I hesitated. The truth was, I had been having pieces appraised regularly, especially as certain artists gained recognition. My insurance company required updated valuations every few years, and I'd been pleasantly surprised by how much some pieces had appreciated. But David's dismissive attitude made me reluctant to share this information. "David, why don't you sit down and let me tell you about some of these artists? Mom, I don't have time for stories about your art friends." He was scrolling through his phone now, probably looking up storage unit prices or donation centers. "I'm trying to help you be practical. Sarah's pregnant. Did I mention that? We're going to need to think about the future, about simplifying your life. All this stuff is just going to be a burden eventually." The pregnancy announcement should have been joyful news, delivered with excitement and celebration. Instead, he'd weaponized it, using his unborn child as justification for dismantling 43 years of my passion. "Congratulations," I managed, though the word felt hollow. "When is Sarah due?" "June. Which is why we need to get serious about this." He gestured again at my walls. "You can't expect us to deal with all this useless clutter when the time comes." Useless clutter. The words echoed in my mind as I stared at him. This was my son, the boy I'd taken to art museums every weekend when he was young, the child who used to sit beside me at kitchen tables while I researched artists and galleries, the teenager who'd rolled his eyes but still accompanied me to gallery openings where he'd eat cheese cubes and complain about the weird art. "Some of this might be worth something to collectors," I offered carefully. "Perhaps we should research—" "Mom, please." David's laugh was sharp and unkind. "Look, I love you, but you're not some sophisticated art dealer. These are impulse purchases from weekend browsing. I'm sure they brought you joy, but let's not pretend they're investments." He moved to examine a piece by Thomas Wright, a sculptor, whose work had been featured in Art in America just 6 months earlier. David picked up the small bronze piece, turning it over in his hands like he was examining a garage sale trinket. "Careful with that," I said sharply. "It's fine, Mom. It's not like it's fragile ancient art or something." He set it down carelessly, and I winced as it clinked against the table. "Look, I've done some research. There are companies that specialize in estate cleanouts. They'll come in, take everything, and give you a small percentage of whatever they can actually sell. It's probably the most efficient way to handle all this. Estate cleanout. As if I were already dead. As if my life's passion was nothing more than debris to be hauled away by strangers who wouldn't know Marcus Johnson from a mall kiosk artist." "I see," I said quietly. "I know it's hard to let go of things. But think about how much space you'll have. Think about how much easier it'll be to keep clean. And honestly, Mom, some of these pieces are just weird." He paused in front of a striking abstract piece by Carmen Valdez, a Latina artist whose work explored themes of identity and displacement. "I mean, what is this even supposed to be?" I looked at the piece he was dismissing, a complex layering of paint, fabric, and found objects that told the story of immigration, family, and belonging. Carmen had spent 2 years on that piece, and it had been featured in a group show about contemporary American identity. The gallery had priced it at $8,000, but I'd purchased it directly from Carmen's studio for $3,000, along with a promise to loan it for future exhibitions. "It's about the experience of being between cultures," I explained. "Carmen's family immigrated from El Salvador when she was—" "Mom, you don't need to justify every purchase. I'm just saying, as art goes, it's not exactly accessible." Accessible? Code for, I don't understand it. Therefore, it has no value. David spent another 20 minutes walking through my collection, offering commentary that became increasingly hurtful. The delicate ink drawings by Peter Kim were just scribbles. The photography series by Angela Murphy documenting vanishing rural communities was depressing and pointless. The mixed media installation by Roberto Santos exploring themes of labor and dignity was ugly and confusing. With each dismissal, I felt something inside me calcifying. This wasn't just about art anymore. This was about respect. About the assumption that because something wasn't immediately comprehensible to him, it was worthless. About the casual way he dismissed 4 decades of learning, growing, and building relationships within a community he'd never bothered to understand. "I think you should seriously consider my suggestion," he said finally, checking his watch. "The clean-out company could probably come next week. Get this all handled before the holidays." Before the holidays. Before his child was born. Before I became even more of an inconvenience to his carefully planned life. "I'll think about it," I said. David kissed my cheek perfunctorily and headed for the door. "I know this is hard, Mom, but it's for the best. You'll feel so much lighter once all this clutter is gone." After he left, I stood in my art room for a long time, seeing it through his eyes. Useless clutter. Garage sale explosion. Impulse purchases from a woman too naive to know better. Then I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and began typing an email to my insurance agent, requesting updated appraisals for my entire collection. The insurance agent, Monica Brennan, arrived the following Thursday with 2 certified appraisers in tow. I'd worked with Monica for nearly 15 years, and she understood the gravity of what we were undertaking. The appraisers, Dr. Harrison Mills from the Portland Art Institute and Jennifer Nakamura, who specialized in contemporary American artists, came, armed with magnifying glasses, cameras, and thick reference books. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "Margaret, I have to say, when you called requesting a complete revaluation, I was intrigued," Monica said as she set up her laptop on my dining room table. "Most people don't maintain collections of this caliber without regular professional assessment." Dr. Mills was already examining the Marcus Johnson piece that David had dismissed so casually. "This is exceptional work," he murmured, adjusting his glasses. "Johnson's market has been climbing steadily since his inclusion in the Whitney Biennial. When did you acquire this?" 2018, directly from his studio in Chicago. I attended his solo show and ended up visiting his workspace. We talked for hours about his technique and his influences. Jennifer looked up from photographing the Carmen Valdez piece. "You have excellent instincts, Margaret. Valdez just signed with the Whitman Gallery in New York. Her prices have tripled in the past 18 months. What followed was the most thorough examination my collection had ever received. The appraisers measured, photographed, and researched each piece while I provided provenance information, where I'd purchased it, when, and often the story of how I'd discovered the artist. Many of these weren't just transactions. They were relationships built over years of gallery visits, studio tours, and art fair conversations. The Elena Rodriguez watercolor that David had barely glanced at was now being examined under specialized lighting. Rodriguez's work has become increasingly sought after, Dr. Mills noted, making detailed notes. Her pieces rarely come to auction, which has driven private sale prices significantly higher. This appears to be from her breakthrough series, the one that got her into the Denver Art Museum's permanent collection. I remembered that purchase vividly. Elena had been a struggling artist then, selling her work at a small gallery in Santa Fe. I'd bought 3 pieces from her, not as an investment, but because her use of color and light reminded me of Georgia O'Keeffe's landscapes, yet with a completely contemporary voice. Over the years, Elena and I had maintained a correspondence. She'd sent me exhibition catalogs, and I'd loaned 2 of my pieces to group shows featuring her work. "The Thomas Wright sculpture is particularly interesting," Jennifer said, carefully, examining the bronze piece David had handled so carelessly. "Wright's early works, which this appears to be, are becoming increasingly rare. He destroyed most of his pieces from this period after his style evolved. The few that remain are highly sought after." I watched them work, feeling a mixture of vindication and sadness. These professionals saw what I'd always known was there, not just aesthetic value, but investment-grade art by artists whose careers I'd followed and supported for decades. Yet the validation came with the bitter knowledge that my own son had looked at the same pieces and seen nothing but clutter. Monica was running calculations on her laptop, cross-referencing recent auction results and gallery prices. Margaret, some of these values are quite substantial. Are you planning to adjust your insurance coverage accordingly? That depends on what we find, I said carefully. The appraisal process took 2 full days. They examined 47 pieces in total: paintings, drawings, sculptures, and mixed media works spanning 23 different artists. Some were artists whose careers had flourished beyond anything I could have predicted when I first discovered them. Others remained relatively unknown, but showed the kind of technical skill and artistic vision that suggested future recognition. Dr. Mills spent considerable time with a series of 5 small paintings by an artist named Rachel Foster, whose work I'd discovered at a graduate student exhibition in 2019. Foster's technique is extraordinary, he said, examining the brushwork with his magnifying glass. She's developed a unique approach to layering that creates this almost luminous effect. Has she had any major exhibitions? She's been included in several group shows, and there's talk of a solo exhibition at the Meridian Gallery next year, I replied. Her work explores themes of memory and place. These pieces are part of her series about childhood homes. Jennifer was documenting everything meticulously, noting not just current market values but also trajectory predictions based on each artist's career development, exhibition history, and critical reception. The scientific approach to something I'd pursued primarily from passion was both fascinating and slightly overwhelming. You've been remarkably prescient in your selections, she told me during a coffee break. Many collectors focus on established names, but you've identified emerging talent at crucial moments in their careers. That takes real knowledge of the contemporary art landscape. The comment struck me deeply. For years, I'd second-guessed my instincts, wondering if I was fooling myself about my understanding of art and artists. David's dismissive attitude wasn't unique. I'd encountered it from other family members, friends, even some gallery personnel who assumed I was just another retired person with disposable income and poor judgment. But I'd done my homework. I'd studied art history, attended lectures, read exhibition catalogs and art criticism. I'd spent countless hours in galleries and museums, not as a tourist, but as a student. I'd developed relationships with artists, curators, and other collectors. I'd learned to see beyond the surface, to understand technique, context, and artistic development. On Friday afternoon, Monica presented me with the preliminary findings. The total appraised value of my collection was substantially higher than even I had anticipated. Several pieces had appreciated far beyond their original purchase prices, and some artists I'd supported early in their careers were now commanding prices that reflected their growing recognition in the art world. The Roberto Santos installation alone is now valued at $15,000, Monica said, referring to the piece David had called ugly and confusing. Santos was just featured in a major exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, and his work is being acquired by several significant collectors. The Carmen Valdez piece David had dismissed as incomprehensible was now worth $18,000. The Elena Rodriguez watercolor he'd suggested came from a craft fair was valued at $22,000. The Marcus Johnson piece that represented a garage sale explosion was appraised at $38,000. Margaret, you need to understand something, Dr. Mills said as he packed up his equipment. This isn't just a collection. It's a curated selection that demonstrates deep knowledge of contemporary American art. You've identified and supported artists at crucial moments in their careers. Some collectors spend decades trying to develop this kind of eye. That evening, I sat in my art room with the preliminary appraisal report, looking at pieces I'd lived with for years, seeing them now through the lens of professional validation. The numbers were impressive, but what mattered more was the recognition that my instincts, my learning, my passion, had been sound all along. I thought about David's visit, his casual dismissal of 43 years of careful curation, his assumption that because he didn't understand something, it must be worthless. His readiness to call in an estate cleanout company to haul away what he saw as an old woman's foolish accumulation of junk. The official appraisal documents would arrive within a week, Monica had promised. Professional certifications of value, complete with detailed analysis of each piece, artist biographies, market comparisons, and trajectory predictions. Documents that would transform David's useless clutter into a collection worth more than most people's houses. I opened my laptop and began composing an email to David. The subject line read, "Updated insurance documentation. Please review." In the body, I wrote a brief note explaining that I'd had my art collection professionally appraised for insurance purposes and would be sending him copies of the documentation for his records, given his expressed concern about my financial planning and estate management. I didn't mention the total value. I didn't explain what the appraisals revealed about my judgment or knowledge. I simply informed him that professional documentation would be forthcoming and asked him to review it carefully, as it pertained to family financial planning he'd shown such keen interest in during his visit. Then I closed the laptop and walked through my art room slowly, stopping before each piece. The late afternoon light was hitting Carmen Valdez's mixed media installation at the perfect angle, illuminating the layered textures and revealing details that weren't visible under electric lighting. The piece seemed to pulse with life, telling its story of cultural identity and belonging to anyone willing to take the time to truly see it. In the corner, Rachel Foster's small paintings glowed with that luminous quality Dr. Mills had noted. The brushwork was indeed extraordinary, each layer of paint applied with a precision that created depth and movement, transforming simple scenes of domestic spaces into meditations on memory and loss. These weren't random purchases or impulse buys. They were relationships, with artists, with ideas, with moments in time when creativity and vision converged into something lasting and meaningful. They represented decades of learning, growing, and developing an eye for quality and significance in contemporary art. David would receive the appraisal certificates within a week. 47 separate documents, each one professionally certified, each one transforming his garage sale explosion into something that would demand his attention and respect. I smiled, thinking about his inbox filling up with official documentation that would challenge every assumption he'd made about his mother's intelligence, judgment, and the value of what he'd been so eager to discard. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the walls where my collection lived. Tomorrow, I would call several of the artists represented in my collection, not to boast about appraisal values, but to check on their current projects, their upcoming exhibitions, their artistic development. These relationships had always been about more than money, and they would continue to be. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel the satisfaction of knowing that David's education was about to begin, one appraisal certificate at a time. The first. Appraisal certificate arrived in my email on Tuesday morning at 9:47 a.m. Monica had organized them chronologically by acquisition date, starting with the oldest piece in my collection, a small oil painting by Catherine Mills that I'd purchased in 1981 from a gallery in Berkeley during my graduate school years. I forwarded it to David immediately with a simple note. First item for your review. More to follow as promised. The Catherine Mills piece, which I'd bought for $350 as a struggling graduate student, was now appraised at $12,000. Mills had gone on to become a respected figure in California landscape painting. Her work featured in permanent collections at several West Coast museums. 20 minutes later, I sent the second certificate, a charcoal drawing by Vincent Chen that I'd discovered at an art fair in 1983. Purchase price, $200. Current appraised value, $8,500. I established a rhythm. Every 20 to 30 minutes throughout the day, another certificate landed in David's inbox. Each one professionally formatted, complete with artist biography, exhibition history, comparable sales data, and detailed justification for the appraisal value. The third certificate was for a mixed media piece by Maria Santos, no relation to Roberto Santos, despite David's likely assumption that I couldn't tell artists apart. Maria's work explored themes of urban decay and renewal through layered materials and found objects. I'd purchased it directly from her studio in Detroit in 1987 for $400. Current value, $11,000. By lunchtime, David's phone was ringing. "Mom, what is this?" His voice carried a strain I hadn't heard before. "Insurance documentation, sweetheart. You expressed such concern about my financial planning and estate management. I thought you should have copies of all the relevant paperwork. These numbers can't be right." Dr. Harrison Mills from the Portland Art Institute and Jennifer Nakamura are both certified appraisers with decades of experience. Their documentation meets all professional standards for insurance and estate purposes. There was a long pause. I could hear the keyboard clicking in the background, David frantically researching, trying to verify what he was seeing. "Mom, are you telling me that ugly painting in your hallway is worth $12,000? The Catherine Mills landscape?" Yes, though I wouldn't describe her work as ugly. Her mastery of light and atmosphere has been widely recognized by critics and collectors for 30 years. More keyboard clicking. I'm looking at auction results. "Mom, there's a Catherine Mills painting that sold for $15,000 last month." That's entirely possible. The art market fluctuates, and auction prices don't always reflect private sale values. Dr. Mills was quite conservative in his appraisals. Another long pause. "How many more of these emails are you planning to send?" 46 more, I believe. Monica organized them chronologically, so you'll see how the collection developed over time. It's quite educational, actually. I heard him exhale sharply before ending the call. The afternoon certificates included some of my favorite discoveries from the 1990s. A sculpture by Patricia Wong that I'd found at a gallery in San Francisco's Mission District. Purchase price $600, current value $14,000. A painting by James Richardson from his Breakthrough series exploring African American identity in post-industrial cities, bought for $800 in 1994, now worth $19,000. Each certificate included detailed analysis of the artist's career trajectory, their exhibition history, critical reception, and market performance. Jennifer Nakamura had been particularly thorough in documenting not just current values, but the reasoning behind them. My phone rang again at 3:30 p.m. "Mom, I need to come over." David's voice had changed completely from our morning conversation. The dismissive confidence was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like panic. "Of course, dear. I'll make coffee." He arrived within an hour, carrying a laptop and looking like he hadn't slept. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and his tie was loosened in a way that suggested stress rather than casual comfort. "I've been researching these artists all day," he said without preamble, settling at my kitchen table and opening his laptop. "Mom, some of these people they're actually famous. Well known in art circles, yes. This Marcus Johnson, the one with the sculpture I thought was just random metal shapes. He was in the Whitney Biennial. Twice. His work is in the Museum of Modern Art's permanent collection." I poured coffee and sat across from him. "Marcus is extremely talented. I've followed his career for 15 years. We've maintained a correspondence since I first visited his studio." David stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "You correspond with him?" "Of course. I've loaned pieces to exhibitions featuring his work. Last year, one of my Marcus Johnson pieces was included in a traveling exhibition about contemporary American sculpture. It toured 5 cities. He scrolled through his laptop screen, which displayed what appeared to be extensive research on my collection. Elena Rodriguez, the watercolor artist, she's been featured in Art in America, twice. Her work is selling at galleries in New York and Los Angeles. Elena's an extraordinary artist. I first discovered her work in Santa Fe when she was just starting out. We've maintained a friendship for over a decade. She often asks my opinion on new pieces before exhibitions. Your opinion? David's voice cracked slightly. Artists ask for your opinion? I've been studying contemporary art for 43 years, David. I've developed relationships within the community. Many artists value input from serious collectors who understand their work. He was quiet for several minutes, scrolling through screen after screen of research. I could see auction results, gallery websites, exhibition catalogs, and artist biographies. The scope of his investigation was impressive and clearly overwhelming. Carmen Valdez, he said finally. The piece I called incomprehensible. She just signed with a major New York gallery. Her prices have tripled in 18 months. Carmen's work is particularly powerful. Her exploration of cultural identity resonates with many collectors and critics. The piece you saw addresses themes of displacement and belonging that are very relevant in contemporary discourse. Mom, I don't understand. David closed his laptop and looked directly at me. How did you know? How did you identify these artists before anyone else did? The question struck me as both revealing and sad. He genuinely couldn't comprehend that. His mother might possess knowledge, insight, or expertise that he lacked. I didn't know they would become valuable, David. That was never the point. I studied art, I attended exhibitions, I read criticism and theory. I learned to recognize quality, innovation, and authentic artistic vision. I supported artists whose work spoke to me, whose techniques impressed me, whose ideas challenged conventional thinking. But the money is incidental. Yes, I'm pleased that my instincts about artistic merit have been validated by market appreciation. But I didn't buy Roberto Santos's installation because I thought it would be worth $15,000 someday. I bought it because his exploration of labor and dignity moved me deeply, because his technique was masterful, because his vision was unique. David stared at the coffee cup in his hands. I called it ugly and confusing. You looked at it for 30 seconds and made a judgment based on unfamiliarity. Roberto spent 2 years creating that piece. It's been featured in 3 major exhibitions and written about by some of the country's most respected art critics. My phone chimed with another email from Monica. The next batch of certificates was ready for forwarding. There are more coming? David asked weakly. 39 more, actually. We're working through the 1990s acquisitions now. Some very interesting discoveries from that period. I forwarded the next certificate while David watched. A painting by Lisa Chang from her series about Asian American family dynamics. Purchase price in 1995, $900. Current appraised value, $16,000. Mom, what's the total value of your collection? I considered the question carefully. The preliminary figure Monica had shared was substantial, but I hadn't planned to reveal it all at once. However, David's attitude had shifted dramatically from dismissive arrogance to genuine curiosity and concern. The preliminary appraisal suggests the collection is worth approximately $478,000. David's coffee cup clattered against the saucer. $478,000? That's conservative. Dr. Mills explained that some pieces might command higher prices at auction, and several artists are experiencing upward market momentum that could increase values significantly. Mom, that's more than my house is worth. Property values. Very, dear. He sat in stunned silence while I forwarded 2 more certificates, a drawing by Michael Torres worth $7,000 and a small sculpture by Andrea Kim valued at $13,500. I suggested an estate cleanout. Company, David said quietly. I wanted them to haul away $500,000 worth of art and give you pennies on the dollar. You didn't know. I should have known. I should have asked questions, done research, shown some respect for something you've spent decades building. He paused, scrolling through his research again. Mom, you're not just a collector. You're a serious collector. These artists, these acquisitions, You've been operating at a professional level for 40 years. The admission meant more to me than he could possibly understand. Not because of vindication, but because it suggested he might finally see me as something more than an aging woman whose interests were irrelevant to his busy, important life. I've learned from mistakes, studied the market, developed relationships with artists and galleries. It's been my passion and my education. And I dismissed it as useless clutter. I reached across the table and touched his hand. David, you're about to become a father. That changes everything about how you see the world, how you understand the relationship between generations, how you value the accumulated wisdom of people who've lived longer than you have. His phone buzzed with another certificate notification. This one was for a piece by Raymond Foster, no relation to Rachel Foster, another assumption he'd likely made. Purchase price in 1996, $700. Current value, $21,000. 37 more to go, I said gently. David looked at his phone, then at me, then around my kitchen where several smaller pieces from my collection hung on the walls. Each one now represented not clutter, but carefully chosen art by recognized professionals whose work had demonstrated lasting value. Mom, I owe you an apology that's bigger than I know how to express. You owe me attention, David. Respect for the fact that I might know things you don't, that my experiences and knowledge have value, that dismissing something simply because you don't understand it isn't wisdom. It's arrogance. His phone buzzed. Again. Certificate 38 was a photograph by Jennifer Walsh from her acclaimed series documenting the changing American Southwest. Original price, $450. Current value, $9,800. David looked at the notification and shook his head slowly. How many more surprises are hiding in that art room of yours? I smiled, thinking about the remaining certificates that would arrive over the next 2 days. Oh, sweetheart, we're just getting started. The certificates continued arriving throughout. Wednesday, each one systematically dismantling another piece of David's assumptions. By noon, his wife Sarah had called me directly. Margaret, David came home last night completely shaken, she said, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone trying to navigate family drama. He's been up all night researching art auctions and gallery websites. What exactly is happening? I explained the situation while forwarding certificate number 23. A mixed media piece by Antonio Rivera that I'd discovered at a small gallery in Phoenix in 1998. Purchase price, $550. Current appraised value, $14,200. Sarah, your husband suggested I hire an estate clean-out company to dispose of what he called useless clutter. I thought he should have proper documentation about what he was so eager to discard. There was a long pause. He mentioned the conversation went badly, but he didn't explain. Margaret, are you saying your art collection is actually valuable? The preliminary appraisal suggests it's worth approximately $478,000. I heard what sounded like a glass being set down hard on a counter. $478,000? That's conservative. Several pieces have shown strong market appreciation, and some artists are experiencing career momentum that could drive values higher. Oh my God, David told me you had some paintings and sculptures, but he made it sound like hobby purchases from weekend browsing. Another certificate arrived from Monica. Number 24 was a drawing by Patricia Gonzalez from her series exploring Chicana identity through portraiture. Original investment in 1999, $300. Current value, $11,700. I forwarded it to David with a note. Patricia's work has been featured in the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery. Thought you might find the documentation interesting. Margaret, Sarah continued, I need to ask you something directly. When David suggested downsizing and moving to a senior community, were you considering it? The question surprised me with its directness, but I appreciated Sarah's straightforward approach. Unlike her husband, she seemed capable of processing information that challenged her preconceptions. I'm 65 years old, Sarah, not 85. I live independently in a home I love, surrounded by art that represents 43 years of passion and learning. Why would I consider giving that up to make David's future inheritance simpler to manage? That's exactly what this is about, isn't it? I forwarded certificate number 25, a sculpture by Robert Kim that had been included in a major exhibition about Korean American artists at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. Purchase price in 2000, $800. Current value, $18,000. Sarah, your husband assumed that because he didn't understand my collection, it must be worthless. He was preparing to dispose of $500,000 worth of carefully curated art without bothering to research its actual value or significance. Margaret, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. The issue isn't knowledge, Sarah. It's respect. David didn't bother to ask questions, to learn about something. That's been central to my life for decades. He made assumptions based on ignorance and then acted on those assumptions with remarkable confidence. David's phone had been buzzing constantly with certificate notifications. I knew from experience that he was likely switching between shock, embarrassment, and frantic research. The systematic nature of the email delivery was intentional, each new piece of evidence building on the last, creating an undeniable pattern that challenged everything he thought he knew about his mother's judgment and expertise. Certificate number 26 arrived. A painting by Michelle Thompson from her acclaimed series about environmental degradation. I'd purchased it directly from her studio in Seattle in 2001 for $1,200. Current appraised value, $24,000. My phone rang immediately. David again. Mom, the Michelle Thompson piece. She's been featured in National Geographic. Her environmental work has been exhibited internationally. Michelle's quite accomplished. Her combination of artistic vision and environmental advocacy has earned recognition from both art critics and conservation organizations. You bought it directly from her studio? I spent an afternoon with Michelle discussing her techniques and her passion for environmental issues. She was working on a series about disappearing glaciers. Extraordinarily powerful work. Mom, I need to understand something. How many of these artists do you know personally? I considered the question while forwarding certificate number 27, a mixed media piece by Daniel Foster, whose exploration of urban architecture had caught my attention at a gallery opening in Portland. In 2002, purchase price $900. Current value, $16,500. David, collecting art isn't just about buying objects. It's about understanding movements, supporting emerging talent, building relationships with creators. I've corresponded with probably 15 of the artists in my collection. I've visited studios, attended openings, loaned pieces to exhibitions. This is a community, not a shopping mall. The silence on his end suggested he was processing this information alongside everything else that had shattered his assumptions about his mother's life and expertise. You loaned pieces to exhibitions? Several times. Museums and galleries often need to borrow works from private collections for thematic exhibitions. 2 of my pieces are currently on loan to a traveling exhibition about contemporary American sculpture. Certificate number 28. A photograph by Stephen Martinez documenting the changing landscape of the American West. Original cost in 2003, $400. Current value, $12,800. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about me becoming a father and understanding the relationship between generations differently. And? I dismissed 43 years of your knowledge and experience because it didn't fit into categories I recognized. I assumed that if I hadn't heard of these artists, they must not be important. I treated you like you were incapable of making informed decisions. The admission was more honest than I'd expected from David, whose professional success had perhaps made him too comfortable with being the smartest person in the room. David, expertise takes many forms. You've built a successful technology company, but that doesn't make you qualified to evaluate contemporary art any more than my knowledge of art qualifies me to assess software development. Certificate number 29 arrived. A sculpture by Amanda Walsh from her series exploring themes of family and memory. Purchase price in 2004, $750. Current appraised value, $13,200. The difference, I continued, is that I would never presume to tell you that your business was worthless simply because I didn't understand it. I would ask questions, show interest, try to learn from your expertise. Mom, I want to learn. I want to understand what you've built. The shift in his tone was remarkable. Yesterday, he'd been patronizing and dismissive. Today, he sounded genuinely curious and respectful, qualities that had been absent from our relationship for far too long. Would you like to come over this weekend? I could show you some of the pieces, explain how I discovered the artists, what drew me to their work. Yes. But Mom, can I ask you something first? Of course. The estate clean-out company I suggested, what would have happened if you'd agreed? I forwarded certificate number 30 while considering his question. This one was for a painting by Carlos Rivera from his breakthrough series about Latino identity in contemporary America. Purchase price in 2005, $1,100. Current value, $19,400. Estate cleanout companies typically pay between 5 and 15% of actual value for items they can resell. They would have given me perhaps $25,000 for a collection worth nearly $500,000. The sharp intake of breath on his end was audible. David, you were asking me to give away $450,000 because you couldn't be bothered to research what you were encouraging me to discard. Mom, Furthermore, these aren't just financial assets. They're relationships, memories, connections to artists and ideas that have enriched my life for decades. You were asking me to dispose of 43 years of passion because it didn't align with your vision of how I should live. Certificate number 31. A mixed media installation by Jennifer Park exploring themes of technology and human connection. Original investment in 2006, $800. Current value, $15,700. I need to make this right, David said quietly. You need to understand that making assumptions about people's lives and knowledge based on your own limited perspective isn't wisdom, it's arrogance. And it's particularly problematic when those assumptions affect major life decisions. You're right. Completely right. Certificate number 32 arrived from Monica. This one was particularly significant. A painting by Maria Valdez, no relation, to Carmen Valdez, from her award-winning series about immigration and family separation. I'd purchased it in 2007 for $900. Current appraised value, $28,000. I forwarded it with a note. Maria's work has been acquired by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Her paintings are considered essential examples of contemporary social realism. David's response came immediately. Mom, the Met? You have work by an artist who's in the Metropolitan Museum? 3 artists in my collection have work in major museum permanent collections. Several others have been featured in significant exhibitions at institutions like the Whitney, the Guggenheim, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. The revelation seemed to stun him into silence. I could imagine him at his desk, surrounded by printouts of auction results and gallery websites, trying to reconcile the sophisticated collection he was discovering with his image of his mother, as someone who needed his guidance about major life decisions. Mom, when you said I should show respect for accumulated wisdom, you weren't just talking about age, were you? I was talking about expertise developed over decades of study, practice, and engagement with a field you dismissed without investigation. Certificate number 33. A sculpture by Thomas Chen, no relation to Vincent Chen, exploring themes of cultural identity through bronze and mixed materials. Purchase price in 2008, $1,200. Current value, $21,600. Sarah wants to meet you properly, David said after a pause. Not just family gatherings, but really talk with you about your collection, your knowledge of art. She studied art history in college, and she's embarrassed that we both made such uninformed assumptions. The gesture was thoughtful, suggesting that Sarah might be more capable than her husband of recognizing expertise in unexpected places. I'd enjoy that conversation. It's been lonely sometimes, having such a central passion that no one in the family understood or appreciated. Certificate number 34 arrived. A photograph by Rachel Kim documenting the evolution of urban neighborhoods through gentrification. Original cost in 2009, $500. Current appraised value, $14,300. 14 more certificates to go, I said, forwarding the latest documentation. Mom, I have one more question. Yes? When I become a father, how do I avoid making the same mistake with my child that I made with you? The question caught me off guard with its vulnerability and insight. David was genuinely grappling with the implications of his behavior, recognizing patterns that extended beyond our immediate conflict. You listen more than you speak. You ask questions instead of making assumptions. You respect that other people, including your own family members, might possess knowledge, wisdom, and expertise that you lack. And you never ever dismiss something as worthless simply because you don't understand it. Certificate number 35 was ready for forwarding. A mixed media piece by Angela Rodriguez, exploring themes of motherhood and professional identity. Purchase price in 2010, $700. Current value, $16,800. 13 more to go, I added, clicking send. David's phone buzzed with the notification. Mom, I'm going to spend the weekend reading about every single artist in your collection. I want to understand not just their market value, but their artistic significance, their contributions to contemporary art. That would mean a great deal to me, David. And Mom? I'm sorry. Not just for the collection assumptions, but for treating you like you were someone who needed my management rather than someone I could learn from. The apology was more comprehensive than I'd dared hope for, addressing not just the immediate issue but the underlying attitude that had created the problem. Apology accepted. Now, are you ready for the final 13 certificates? Some of my most recent acquisitions are quite remarkable. The final 13 certificates represented my most recent acquisitions, pieces from 2011 to 2024, that showcased how my eye had continued to develop even into my 60s. These weren't nostalgic purchases or safe choices, but bold investments in emerging artists whose work pushed boundaries and challenged conventional thinking. Certificate number 35 landed in David's inbox Thursday morning. A digital art piece by Alex Thompson that explored the intersection of technology and human emotion. I'd purchased it in 2011 for $1,500 when digital art was still considered experimental by many traditional collectors. Current appraised value, $32,000. My phone rang within minutes. Mom, digital art? In 2011? Alex was pioneering new techniques for incorporating technology into traditional artistic frameworks. The piece uses interactive elements that respond to environmental changes, temperature, humidity, even electromagnetic fields from nearby devices. That's incredibly forward-thinking. The art world was skeptical of digital media for years, but I could see the potential. Alex's work bridges the gap between traditional craftsmanship and contemporary technology in ways that are both beautiful and conceptually sophisticated. Certificate number 36 followed an hour later. A sculpture by Priya Patel that incorporated recycled materials to comment on environmental degradation. Purchase price in 2012, $2,000. Current value, $25,800. Priya's work has been featured in exhibitions about art and climate change at the Venice Biennale, I explained when David called again. Her use of discarded materials isn't just environmental commentary. It's technically masterful. She transforms waste into objects of genuine beauty. Mom, the Venice Biennale? That's one of the most prestigious art exhibitions in the world. I've been following Priya's career since her graduate school exhibitions. Her evolution as an artist has been remarkable to witness. Certificate number 37 arrived that afternoon, a painting by Jerome Washington from his series addressing police brutality and racial justice. I'd acquired it in 2013, long before such themes became mainstream in contemporary art discourse. Original price, $1,200. Current appraised value, $41,000. This piece, I told David during our evening conversation, was created 2 years before the Black Lives Matter movement gained national prominence. Jerome was addressing these issues in his art when many galleries were reluctant to exhibit politically charged work. You recognize the importance of his message before it became widely acknowledged? Art has always been a vehicle for social commentary. Jerome's technical skill combined with his powerful subject matter made his work significant, regardless of broader cultural trends. The fact that society has caught up to his vision only validates what was already apparent to those paying attention. The weekend brought David and Sarah to my house for the promised tour. Sarah's art history background was immediately apparent. She asked informed questions about technique, composition, and artistic influences that demonstrated genuine understanding. Margaret, this Carmen Valdez piece, Sarah said, standing before the mixed media installation David had once dismissed as incomprehensible. The layering technique she uses here, it's similar to Anselm Kiefer's work, but with a completely different cultural perspective. Exactly. Carmen studied Kiefer's use of materials, but applied those techniques to explore Latina identity and immigration experiences. The result is both formally sophisticated and deeply personal. David watched our conversation with the expression of someone discovering that his wife and mother shared a language he'd never bothered to learn. Certificate number 38 had arrived that morning, a series of photographs by Maya Chen documenting the disappearing small towns of rural America. Purchase price in 2014, $800. Current value, $18,500. Maya's work captures something essential about American identity that's being lost to urbanization and economic change, I explained, showing them the actual photographs hanging in my living room. These aren't just documentary images. They're elegiac portraits of communities in transition. Sarah studied the images carefully. The composition in this one, the way she uses natural light to illuminate the abandoned storefront, it's reminiscent of Edward Hopper's treatment of urban isolation, but applied to rural decay. That's precisely why I was drawn to her work. Maya understands the artistic tradition she's working within, but she brings a contemporary perspective to classic American themes. Certificate number 39 arrived via email as we talked. A sculpture by David Kim, the irony of the name wasn't lost on any of us, that explored themes of family expectations and individual identity. Purchase price in 2015, $1,800. Current appraised value, $27,000. The artist David Kim, I said, showing them the piece, creates work about the pressure young Korean Americans feel to meet family expectations while establishing their own identities. His sculptures use traditional Korean materials and techniques to express very contemporary psychological conflicts. My son David studied the piece with new attention. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. How did you discover his work? I attended a group exhibition featuring Asian American artists at a gallery in Seattle. David Kim's pieces stood out immediately, not just for their technical excellence, but for their emotional honesty. I purchased this piece directly from the artist, after a long conversation about his creative process. The remaining certificates arrived throughout the weekend, each one revealing another layer of my collecting philosophy and market insight. Certificate number 40. A mixed media piece by Isabella Rodriguez exploring themes of gender and power through portraiture. Purchase price in 2016, $2,200. Current value, $34,000. Certificate number 41. A digital installation by Marcus Williams that used artificial intelligence to generate responsive art based on viewer interaction. Purchased in 2017 for $3,000, now valued at $46,000. You bought AI-generated art in 2017? David asked, clearly amazed. Marcus wasn't using AI to replace human creativity. He was collaborating with it, creating a dialogue between human intention and machine learning. The results were unlike anything I'd seen before. Certificate number 42 arrived Monday. Morning. A painting by Sofia Gonzalez from her series about climate refugees. Purchase price in 2018, $2,500. Current appraised value, $38,700. Sophia's work addresses one of the most pressing issues of our time, I explained during David's morning check-in. Call. Her paintings combine documentary accuracy with emotional power in ways that make abstract policy issues deeply personal. The final certificates represented my most recent acquisitions, pieces that demonstrated my continuing engagement with emerging artists and evolving artistic movements. Certificate number 43. A sculpture by Ahmed Hassan, exploring themes of cultural displacement through geometric abstraction. Purchased in 2019 for $3,200, currently valued at $42,000. Certificate number 44. A multimedia installation by Rachel Foster. Not the same Rachel Foster whose work I'd acquired earlier, highlighting the diversity of artists I'd discovered over the decades. This Rachel Foster's work, purchased in 2020 for $2,800, was now worth $31,000. Certificate number 45. A painting by Michael Torres exploring the psychological impact of the pandemic through surrealist imagery. I'd acquired it in 2021 for $4,000 when many galleries were struggling and artists were desperate for sales. Current value, $29,000. You continued buying art during the pandemic? Sarah asked when they came. For dinner Tuesday evening. Artists needed support more than ever during that period. Many galleries closed temporarily, exhibition opportunities disappeared, and collectors stopped purchasing. I saw it as both an opportunity to acquire excellent work and a responsibility to support artists during a crisis. Certificate number 46. A digital art piece by Zoe Williams that explored themes of virtual reality and human connection. Purchase price in 2022, $5,000. Current appraised value, $37,000. Zoe's work addresses how digital technology is changing fundamental aspects of human relationship and identity. Her art isn't just about technology, it's about what it means to be human in an increasingly digital world. The final certificate, number 47, arrived Wednesday morning. It was for my most recent acquisition, a painting by Carlos Martinez, from his series about aging and wisdom in American culture. I'd purchased it just 6 months earlier for $6,000. The appraisal valued it at $8,500, modest appreciation, but Dr. Mills had noted strong upward trajectory for Martinez's work. This piece, I told David as we stood before it in my art room, speaks to exactly what we've been discussing. Carlos explores how society dismisses the knowledge and experience of older people, assuming that age equals irrelevance rather than accumulated wisdom. David studied the painting in silence. The central figure was an elderly woman surrounded by books, artifacts, and symbols of learning, while younger figures in the background moved past her without acknowledgement. It's about what I did to you, isn't it? It's about a broader cultural pattern, David. But yes, our experience reflects the themes Carlos is exploring. The systematic delivery of all 47 certificates had taken exactly 1 week. David's transformation during that period was remarkable. from dismissive arrogance to genuine respect and curiosity. But more importantly, our relationship had shifted from one where he saw himself as my manager to one where he recognized me as someone with expertise worth learning from. "Mom, I need to tell you something," David said as we finished reviewing the complete collection. "When I suggested the estate cleanout company, I wasn't just being practical, I was being selfish." I waited for him to continue. "I looked at your collection and saw work that would be complicated to deal with in the future. I wanted to simplify my eventual responsibilities by convincing you to dispose of anything that seemed difficult to understand or manage." The honesty was painful but necessary. "You saw my passion as a future inconvenience." "Yes, and I'm ashamed of that perspective. You've built something extraordinary, not just financially, but intellectually and culturally. You've supported artists, preserved important work, created relationships with creative communities. I tried to reduce all of that to a storage problem." We stood together in my art room, surrounded by 47 pieces that told the story of 43 years of learning, growing, and engaging with contemporary art. The late afternoon light illuminated Carmen Valdez's installation, Marcus Johnson's sculpture, Elena Rodriguez's watercolor, each piece a testament to artistic vision and collecting insight. "David, the most valuable thing about this collection isn't the money. It's the relationships, the knowledge, the connections to artists and ideas that have shaped my understanding of the world. You can't appraise that with certificates." "I understand that now. And Mom, I want my child to know their grandmother as someone with passions, expertise, and wisdom worth learning from, not as someone whose interests need to be managed or simplified." The promise meant more to me than all 47 appraisal certificates combined. "Then bring the baby here when they're old enough to appreciate art. Let them grow up understanding that creativity and learning are lifelong pursuits, that expertise takes many forms, and that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources." David's phone buzzed with one final email notification. I'd sent him a comprehensive document Monica had prepared. A complete catalog of my collection, including high-resolution photographs, detailed provenance information, and market analysis. "What's this?" "Insurance documentation for your records. Since you expressed such concern about estate planning, I thought you should have complete information about family assets." He opened the document on his phone, scrolling through page after page of professional documentation that transformed his useless clutter into a carefully cataloged collection worth nearly $500,000. "Mom, I'll never live down calling this collection useless clutter, will I?" I smiled, looking around my art room where 43 years of passion, knowledge, and careful curation surrounded us. "Probably not, sweetheart, but that's okay. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones that stick with us longest." The evening light was fading, casting long shadows across walls lined with art that told stories of creativity, perseverance, and vision. My inbox was finally quiet. All 47 certificates delivered, all assumptions challenged, all relationships transformed. Tomorrow, I would call several artists to check on their current projects. I would research emerging talent at galleries and art fairs. I would continue the work of collecting, learning, and supporting contemporary art that had defined 4 decades of my life. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel the satisfaction of knowing that my son finally understood the difference between clutter and collection, between worthless accumulation and careful curation, between an old woman's hobby and a sophisticated collector's expertise. One certificate at a time. 3 months after the last appraisal certificate landed in David's inbox, my art room had become an unexpected gathering place. What started as David's genuine attempt to understand my collection had evolved into regular family visits that brought new energy to spaces that had been quietly appreciated for decades. Sarah arrived every Thursday afternoon with art books from the library, eager to discuss connections between pieces in my collection and broader artistic movements. Her art history background provided a framework for conversations I'd longed to have with family members who understood the significance of what surrounded us. "Margaret, I've been researching the Chicano art movement," Sarah said during one of our sessions, settling into the reading chair I'd positioned near the Carmen Valdez installation. Carmen's work fits into a tradition that includes artists, like Judith Baca and Carlos Almaraz, but her approach to mixed media is distinctly contemporary. Carmen studied the muralist tradition extensively before developing her current style, I replied, pulling out the correspondence folder I maintained for each artist. She sent me photographs from her research trip to Los Angeles in 2015, where she studied Baca's work firsthand. Sarah examined the letters and photographs I'd collected over years of friendship with Carmen. "You've documented her artistic development like a scholar." "I've documented all of their developments. Watching an artist evolve over time, seeing how their technique matures, how their themes deepen, how they respond to criticism and success, that's one of the most rewarding aspects of serious collecting." These conversations had attracted David's attention in ways I hadn't anticipated. Initially, he'd joined us out of polite interest, but gradually he began asking questions that demonstrated genuine curiosity about artistic process and cultural significance. "Mom, the Marcus Johnson sculpture, you mentioned he studied under someone famous?" "David Smith, actually. Marcus spent 2 years as Smith's assistant before developing his own approach to abstract sculpture. You can see Smith's influence in Marcus's understanding of spatial relationships, but Marcus brings a contemporary perspective to industrial materials that Smith never explored." David pulled out his phone to research David Smith, a habit he'd developed during our art discussions. His systematic approach to learning about each artist had become almost academic in its thoroughness. "Smith's work sells for millions at auction," David said, scrolling through sale results. "Marcus Johnson studied under someone whose pieces are in major museum collections worldwide. Artistic lineage matters in the art world," I explained. Teachers pass techniques, perspectives, and connections to students who then develop their own voices. Marcus learned foundational skills from Smith, but his exploration of contemporary social themes represents his unique contribution to sculptural tradition. These family art sessions had an unexpected side effect. My phone began ringing with calls from other artists in my collection. Word had spread through the artistic community that I was sharing my collection with family members who showed genuine interest and respect. Elena Rodriguez called on a Friday evening in February. "Margaret, I heard from Carmen that your family has been learning about your collection. Would you be interested in a studio visit? I'm working on a new series that builds on themes from the piece you own." The invitation thrilled me. Studio visits had become rare as artists' careers flourished and their time became increasingly valuable. Elena's offer suggested our renewed family engagement with the collection had impressed the artistic community. "I'd love to visit your studio, Elena. Would it be appropriate to bring my son and daughter-in-law? They've been studying contemporary art with genuine enthusiasm." "Of course. I'd enjoy meeting the family members who've inspired you to share your collection more actively." The studio visit, scheduled for the following Saturday, represented something unprecedented in my collecting experience. For 43 years, my engagement with artists had been largely private, personal relationships that my family knew little about and cared less to understand. Now, David and Sarah would witness firsthand the professional respect I'd earned within artistic communities. Elena's studio in Southeast Portland occupied a converted warehouse space shared with 6 other artists. The collaborative environment buzzed with creative energy, painters working on large canvases, a sculptor welding metal assemblages, a photographer developing prints in a makeshift darkroom. "Margaret!" Elena emerged from her workspace, paint-stained, apron over jeans, arms extended in genuine welcome. "I'm so glad you could come." She led us through the shared space, introducing us to fellow artists who greeted me by name and inquired about pieces in my collection. The level of familiarity surprised David. These weren't casual acquaintances, but professional colleagues who valued my opinion and support. "Elena, your new series looks extraordinary," I said, examining canvases that represented clear evolution from the watercolor work I'd collected years earlier. "The scale is much larger than your previous pieces." "I've been thinking about our conversations about Georgia O'Keeffe's landscape work," Elena replied. "You suggested that my exploration of color and light could benefit from larger formats that allow for more immersive viewing experiences." Sarah stepped closer to examine Elena's technique. "The layering you're using here, it creates depth that wouldn't be possible in smaller formats." "Exactly. Margaret's encouragement to experiment with scale has opened new possibilities for how viewers interact with the work." David listened to our technical discussion with the focused attention he typically reserved for business meetings. The revelation that artists sought my advice about their creative development clearly impressed him in ways that appraisal certificates couldn't convey. "Elena, how long have you and my mother been discussing your work?" "About 12 years. Margaret was one of the first collectors to take my work seriously. Her feedback and support during my early career made an enormous difference in my confidence and development as an artist. We spent 2 hours in Elena's studio, examining new pieces and discussing her artistic evolution. Elena showed us preparatory sketches, explained her color choices, and described how our conversations had influenced her creative decisions over the years. "Margaret, I want to propose something," Elena said as we prepared to leave. "I'm planning a solo exhibition for next fall, my first major show in 5 years. Would you consider loaning your piece for inclusion? It would help demonstrate the continuity of my artistic development." The request honored me deeply. Being asked to loan work to an artist's exhibition represented the highest form of collector validation, recognition that my piece was integral to understanding the artist's overall body of work. "I'd be honored to participate in your exhibition, Elena." During the drive home, David and Sarah discussed the studio visit with enthusiasm that surprised me. "Mom, Elena treated you like a colleague," David said. "She wasn't just being polite, she genuinely values your opinion about her work." That's what serious collecting involves, David. It's not just acquisition, it's relationship building, ongoing engagement with artistic development, active participation in cultural conversations. "I had no idea," Sarah admitted. "I thought collecting was primarily about buying pieces you liked and displaying them attractively. That's decoration, not collecting." Serious collecting requires understanding artistic movements, recognizing emerging talent, supporting creators through purchases and advocacy, and maintaining relationships that benefit both artists and the broader cultural community. The studio visit had revealed another dimension of my collecting practice that appraisal certificates couldn't capture. My relationships with artists represented decades of mutual respect and intellectual exchange that had influenced their creative development and enriched my understanding of contemporary art. Word of our family's increased engagement with my collection continued spreading through artistic networks. Other artists began reaching out with exhibition invitations, studio visit offers, and requests to borrow pieces for thematic group shows. Marcus Johnson called in March with news that made my week. "Margaret, I've been selected for a major retrospective at the Seattle Art Museum. The curators want to include pieces from private collections that demonstrate the evolution of my work over time. Your sculpture would be essential to that narrative." The Seattle Art Museum retrospective represented the pinnacle of Marcus's career recognition. Being asked to contribute to such a significant exhibition validated not just my collecting judgment, but my role in supporting his artistic development over 15 years. "Marcus, I'm thrilled about your retrospective. Of course I'll loan the piece." "Margaret, there's something else. The museum wants to include a section about collectors who've supported contemporary artists throughout their careers. They'd like to interview you about your collecting philosophy and your relationships with artists like Elena, Carmen, and myself." The interview request stunned me. Museums rarely acknowledged private collectors unless they were major donors or celebrities. Being recognized for my collecting expertise and artist relationships represented professional validation I'd never anticipated. I'd be honored to participate in the interview. David and Sarah's reaction to this news exceeded even my own excitement. "Mom, you're going to be featured in a major museum exhibition?" David asked when I shared Marcus's call. "A small feature, probably just a wall panel with quotes about supporting emerging artists." "Margaret, this is incredible," Sarah said. "Museum." Recognition of private collectors is extremely rare. They're acknowledging your expertise and your contribution to contemporary art. The interview, scheduled for late March, would take place at the Seattle Art Museum with their senior curator of contemporary art. Dr. Patricia Hoffman had curated exhibitions at major institutions nationwide and written extensively about the role of private collectors in supporting emerging artists. Preparing for the interview required reviewing 43 years of collecting decisions, artist relationships, and market developments. I organized correspondence files, exhibition catalogs, and purchase records that documented my engagement with the contemporary art world. The depth of documentation surprised even me. Letters from artists thanking me for early support, exhibition, catalogs featuring pieces I'd loaned, articles mentioning my collection and discussions of specific artistic movements, evidence of sustained engagement with cultural conversations I'd sometimes felt were one-sided. "Mom, you've been operating as an art professional for decades," David said, reviewing materials I'd assembled for the interview. "This correspondence with Elena about her artistic development reads like curatorial consultation. I never thought of myself as a professional, just as someone passionate about supporting good art and emerging talent. But that's exactly what museum curators and gallery directors do," Sarah pointed out. "You've been identifying important artists, supporting their development, and building collections that document significant artistic movements. The only difference is you were doing it independently, without institutional affiliation. The realization that my collecting activities paralleled professional curatorial work had never occurred to me. I'd simply followed my passion for contemporary art, trusting my developing eye and building relationships with artists whose work moved me." The Seattle Art Museum interview took place on a rainy Thursday afternoon in Dr. Hoffman's office overlooking Elliott Bay. She'd obviously researched my collection thoroughly, asking detailed questions about specific acquisitions and their significance within broader artistic contexts. "Mrs. Chen Williams, your collection demonstrates remarkable consistency in identifying artists at crucial moments in their career development. Can you explain your selection process?" "I look for technical excellence combined with authentic voice and meaningful content. Many emerging artists have one or two of these qualities, but the combination of all three usually indicates lasting significance. You've supported several artists who've gone on to major museum exhibitions and critical recognition. How do you identify this potential early in an artist's career?" "I pay attention to how artists talk about their work, how they respond to criticism, how they approach technical challenges. Artists with staying power demonstrate intellectual curiosity about their medium and their subject matter. They're constantly learning and evolving." Dr. Hoffman asked about specific pieces, market developments, and my relationships with artists. The conversation lasted 2 hours and covered topics I'd never discussed publicly before: collecting philosophy, market prediction, artist development, and the role of private collectors in supporting contemporary culture. "Your collection represents something increasingly rare," Dr. Hoffman concluded: patient, thoughtful engagement with emerging artists based on aesthetic and intellectual criteria rather than market trends or social status. The interview would be edited into a 15-minute video feature for the Marcus Johnson retrospective, along with wall text discussing my role in supporting his career development. But more importantly, it validated my collecting expertise in ways that changed how I understood my own contributions to contemporary art. Driving home from Seattle, I reflected on the extraordinary transformation 3 months had brought to my life. David's dismissive comments about useless clutter had triggered a process that revealed not just financial value, but professional recognition I'd never actively sought. My art room was no longer a private sanctuary where I quietly appreciated beautiful objects. It had become a place where family members learned about cultural movements, where artists shared their latest work, where relationships built over decades were finally acknowledged and celebrated. The appraisal certificates had served their purpose. Shocking. David into recognizing the financial value of what he'd dismissed. But the real transformation came from ongoing engagement, from learning to see expertise in unexpected places, from understanding that passion pursued with dedication becomes knowledge worth sharing. Tomorrow, Elena would call with updates about her fall exhibition. Marcus would share news about his retrospective preparations. Carmen would send photographs from her latest studio work. The artistic community I'd quietly supported for decades would continue to flourish, and now my family would witness and participate in those relationships. The certificates had cluttered David's inbox for exactly 1 week. But the education they triggered would continue for the rest of our lives. 1 year later, I stood in the nursery David and Sarah had prepared for their daughter, watching my son carefully hang a small print by Rachel Foster, the young artist, whose luminous paintings had caught Dr. Mill's attention during the appraisal process. "Are you sure this is appropriate for a baby's room?" David asked, adjusting the frame for the 3rd time. "Emma will grow up seeing real art from the beginning," Sarah replied, cradling their 3-week-old daughter. "She'll understand that beauty and creativity are normal parts of daily life." The print was a gift I'd commissioned from Rachel specifically for Emma's nursery, a gentle abstract piece in soft blues and greens that captured light in ways that would fascinate a developing mind. Rachel had been honored to create something for the granddaughter of a collector who'd supported her work since graduate school. "Margaret, I have something to confess," David said as we admired the completed nursery. "I've started collecting." The admission surprised me more than anything that had happened during our year of transformation. "What kind of pieces are you acquiring?" "Small works by emerging artists. Nothing expensive. I'm not ready for that level of investment. But I've been visiting galleries, talking to artists, trying to develop my own eye." He pulled out his phone to show me photographs of 3 small pieces he'd purchased over the past 6 months. Each one demonstrated thoughtful consideration, interesting compositions, skilled technique, authentic voice. "David, these are excellent choices. You're developing real aesthetic judgment. I have a good teacher," he said, smiling. "And I finally understand what you meant about relationships being more important than transactions." The Seattle Art Museum retrospective had opened 3 months earlier to significant critical acclaim. Marcus Johnson's 20-year career survey drew visitors from across the Pacific Northwest, and the collector spotlight featuring my interview had generated unexpected attention. 2 major art publications had contacted me for interviews about supporting emerging artists. A collectors forum in San Francisco had invited me to speak about identifying talent early in artistic careers. The Portland Art Institute had asked me to serve on an advisory committee for their contemporary acquisitions. Professional recognition I'd never sought was arriving just as I reached an age when many people begin scaling back their activities. Instead, I found myself more engaged with the art world than ever before, finally able to share knowledge I'd accumulated quietly for decades. "Mom, there's something else," David said, settling into the rocking chair where he'd been spending hours with Emma. "Sarah and I have been discussing your future, not in the way I did before, but thoughtfully." I waited, curious about this new approach to family planning. "We want Emma to grow up knowing her grandmother as someone with expertise, passion, and ongoing engagement with the world. We want to support your collection, not simplify it." "What does that mean practically?" "We've opened a college fund for Emma, but we've also opened what we're calling an art education fund." We want to contribute money specifically for you to continue collecting, with the understanding that Emma will eventually inherit pieces that will teach her about aesthetic judgment, cultural significance, and the importance of supporting artists. The gesture moved me more than I could express. Instead of seeing my collection as a burden to manage, they were treating it as an educational legacy worth expanding. We've also talked to our estate attorney, Sarah added, about establishing a formal structure that will protect the collection's integrity and ensure Emma understands its significance when she's old enough to inherit it. You're planning for the collection to remain intact? We're planning for Emma to understand what she's inheriting, David replied. The financial value, yes, but more importantly, the relationships, the knowledge, the responsibility of supporting contemporary art. Emma stirred in Sarah's arms, opening dark eyes that seemed to focus on the Rachel Foster print with unusual intensity for such a young infant. She likes the painting, Sarah observed. Babies respond to certain color combinations and light patterns, I said, moving closer to study Emma's reaction. Rachel's work creates exactly the kind of visual interest that stimulates developing cognition. The scene represented everything I'd hoped for but never dared expect. 3 generations connected by appreciation for art, beauty, and the importance of supporting creative expression. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena Rodriguez. Margaret, the gallery wants to discuss a possible book about collectors who've shaped contemporary art. Your name came up as someone who should be featured. Interested? The invitation represented another form of validation, another opportunity to share knowledge with people who might benefit from decades of learning about art and artists. Good news? David asked, noticing my smile. Elena's gallery is discussing a book about influential collectors. They want to include a chapter about my collecting approach. Mom, that's incredible. You're becoming recognized as an expert in your field. The transformation from dismissed hobbyist to acknowledged expert had taken exactly 1 year and 47 appraisal certificates. But the real change wasn't in external recognition. It was in family relationships that now honored, rather than dismissed, accumulated knowledge and passion. David, can I ask you something? Of course. What would you tell other people who are dismissing their parents' interests without investigation? He considered the question while watching Emma's continued fascination with the Rachel Foster print. I'd tell them that expertise takes many forms, that passion pursued with dedication becomes knowledge worth respecting, and that assuming someone's interests are worthless because you don't understand them isn't wisdom, it's arrogance. And I'd tell them that the people who raised them might know things they don't, might have developed skills and relationships they've never bothered to discover, might deserve curiosity instead of dismissal. The answer was more thoughtful than I'd expected, suggesting genuine understanding rather than superficial apology. Emma had fallen asleep, still facing the painting that would be among her first visual memories. She would grow up in a home where art was valued, where creativity was supported, where aesthetic judgment was considered a skill worth developing. Margaret, Sarah said quietly, we have one more thing to tell you. Yes? We've been talking to other parents in our circle about their relationships with their own parents' interests and expertise. David's experience has made us realize how often adult children dismiss their parents' knowledge without investigation. And we're organizing informal gatherings where parents can share their expertise with adult children who are willing to learn. Art, music, cooking, gardening, history, whatever knowledge older family members have developed over decades. The idea struck me as both necessary and revolutionary. How many families struggled with the same dynamics we'd experienced? How much accumulated wisdom was being dismissed simply because younger generations couldn't recognize expertise in unexpected forms? The first gathering is next month, David added. We'd like you to talk about collecting, not just the financial aspects, but the relationships, the learning process, the community engagement. Share what you've learned about developing aesthetic judgment and supporting artists. Other people might benefit from hearing about your approach, Sarah concluded. looking around Emma's nursery, at the carefully chosen art, the thoughtful preparation. For a child who would grow up understanding beauty and creativity as essential parts of life, I realized that our family's transformation had implications beyond our immediate relationships. The 47 appraisal certificates that had cluttered David's inbox for 1 week had triggered changes that would influence Emma's entire upbringing and potentially impact other families struggling with similar issues of respect and recognition. I'd be honored to share what I've learned, I said. Emma opened her eyes again, focusing once more on Rachel Foster's painting with the intense attention that newborns bring to anything that genuinely interests them. She would grow up surrounded by art chosen with care, supported by family members who understood its significance, and raised to appreciate the difference between decoration and collection, between casual browsing and serious engagement with culture. The afternoon light was hitting the nursery at the perfect angle, illuminating Rachel's careful brushwork and casting gentle shadows that would shift throughout the day, providing Emma with constantly changing visual experiences that would shape her developing aesthetic sensibility. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email from Carmen Valdez, sharing photographs from her latest exhibition opening. The artistic community I'd supported quietly for decades continued to flourish, and now my family was actively engaged with that community as participants rather than skeptical observers. "Mom," David said as I prepared to leave, "thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on us. For teaching us the difference between knowledge and ignorance, between respect and dismissal, between seeing value and missing it entirely. For showing us," Sarah added, "that expertise comes in many forms and deserves recognition regardless of whether it fits conventional expectations." I kissed Emma's forehead gently, watching her eyes track the movement of light across Rachel Foster's painting. She would inherit more than financial assets. She would inherit an understanding of beauty, creativity, and the importance of supporting artists who dedicate their lives to enriching human experience. The drive home took me past several galleries where I'd discovered artists over the years, past the frame shop where I'd prepared pieces for exhibition loans, past the coffee shop where I'd met with artists to discuss their developing work. My art room awaited, still filled with 47 pieces that had been transformed from useless clutter to recognized collection in the span of 1 week. But their true value had never been financial. It was educational, relational, and cultural. Tomorrow, I would call Elena about the collector book project. I would respond to the Portland Art Institute about their advisory committee invitation. I would research emerging artists whose work might deserve support and attention. The systematic delivery of appraisal certificates had achieved exactly what I'd intended: David's complete education about the difference between assumption and investigation, between dismissal and respect, between seeing his mother as someone who needed management and recognizing her as someone with expertise worth learning from. But the real victory wasn't in the certificates or the museum recognition or the professional validation. It was in Emma's nursery, where real art would surround a developing mind, where beauty would be understood as essential rather than optional, where the next generation would grow up knowing that creativity deserves support and aesthetic judgment, deserves respect. One certificate at a time, one conversation at a time, one relationship at a time. The transformation continued. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.